Yep, we're live.
It's loading, just one sec. Okay, we're good.
Good afternoon. Thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. And on behalf, my name is Archana Sunil, and on behalf of APPWW, we thank Renton Kreations for inviting us to be part of this very important discussion. With us today is also my colleague on the board of APPWW, Ram Dikshit. And as we all know, our country and our local communities are going through rough times. And in the last few weeks, we've seen and heard strong emotions on the topic of racial divides from across the spectrum, with many different solutions being proposed from different perspectives. As Thomas Sowell, a well-known economist and scholar, once said, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. Is that true? Are there ways to completely solve this deep divide? What are the trade-offs that we should be prepared to make to overcome this divide? With those goals in mind, let's begin today's town hall, how Gen Z can define allyship to bridge the racial divide. Before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to invite my colleague Ram to tell you all what APPW is and why we're here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Archana. And again, before I talk about who we are, I'm so excited that we're having this town hall with the younger generation, because ultimately the issue of race and bridging the racial divide is something our country has been grappling with for over 100 years. Still haven't been able to solve it. And it's really up to all of you listening in, people taking the initiative to talk about this. We're going to have to work together. And in that context, APPWW, the Alliance for Persecuted Peoples Worldwide, we're a nonpartisan nonprofit based here in the state of Washington. And we focus on working with people who don't have a voice, people who are persecuted, who are oppressed at the intersection of race, gender, and sexual orientation. Because if you think about it, it's people that these are typically people of color, people that are most vulnerable. And what we at APPWW do is, one, we drive awareness, because the first element of overcoming these issues is learning about each other, understanding each other. And once that education and that awareness happens, what we do is we drive advocacy, because you've got to listen, you've got to learn, and then you've got to execute. That's what we're all about. And I sincerely hope that as an outcome of today's town hall, some of you get inspired to step up. We've listened, we've learned, and you join us in action. So I'll hand it back to you, Archana.
Awesome. Thanks, Ram. So here's what we'll do today. I will introduce each of our panelists first. And as I introduce each of you, please take 2 minutes to make your opening statements. And after you've all had a chance to share your initial thoughts, Ram and I will then dive deeper into some questions to ponder over with you guys and get your views on it. So first up, we have Akash Dilip, who is a 12th grader at Liberty High School in Issaquah School District. Hey, hey, Akash.
Hello. So I can just start with my opening statement?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. So to me, bridging the racial divide means ensuring that the people belonging to our nation's oppressed racial communities are given equal protection under the law and are provided with equal opportunities to ensure that they have means to attain a higher standard of life. Currently, our nation's oppressed races, namely the African American and Hispanic community, are being disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 crisis, highlighting the inherent socioeconomic inequalities persistent in the framework of our nation. The most powerful tool we have in combating these socioeconomic inequalities is education. Government and school systems must work in conjunction to offer extra support for students who are a part of these oppressed communities, ensuring that these students receive plentiful resources to excel in education and eventually land a well-paying livelihood. On a personal level, I feel we must first acknowledge our privilege, as that is the first step in creating conversations about solidarity. After we gain that awareness, I believe we must seek to educate ourselves on the communities we want to advocate for, and really gain a deep understanding of the history surrounding these communities, as well as how their past has contributed towards their present issues. For example, the effects of the Jim Crow laws are still evident in our country today, and this is shown through the stark economic inequality that persists within the African American community due to decades of inferior schooling, livelihood, and housing. I also believe that interaction is key. In order to better understand the issues of other communities, we must not limit ourselves to our own personal circle. Rather, we must seek out interaction with those belonging to different racial and cultural groups to gain a broader and more well-rounded perspective on the action that can be taken to yield positive change.
Super. Thank you, Akash.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Seku Sanders, who is a 9th grader from Seattle. Seku? Are you on, Seku?
I don't think he's here today.
Is he here?
I don't think he's here today.
Oh, okay, no problem. We'll move on to, 1 second, let me. Do we have Ryan Zumwalt, 10th grader?
Yeah.
Awesome. So we have Ryan Zumwalt. He's a 10th grader from Hazen High School in the Renton School District. Welcome, Ryan.
Hi.
Go ahead. What do you have to tell us?
So for me, I think it means that we treat everyone equally, regardless of their race or culture, because I don't think it's something like an issue about law. I think it's about how everyone treats each other, or things like how it's systematic, how people are like not granted the same housing rights, the same treatment in public. And I mean, we have like 3% of our population for Black people who are living in 20% of our poverty rate. And that disparity, it shows that it's a problem. Sorry, hold on.
All right.
I feel like people ignore things like this and only focus on large issues nationwide.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's so many little things that show the gap between. I'm sorry, I can't. I'm really nervous. Hold on. Can you come back to me?
Yeah, absolutely. We can
Okay.
totally do that. Absolutely. Remind me though, okay, at the end.
Okay.
All right, let's get to
You
Akil.
were doing fine, Ryan, just FYI. You were doing
Yeah.
a fine job there.
Yes, yes. But take your time. We'll come back to you too. We now have Akil, who is a 10th grader at Hazen High School as well. Welcome, Akil.
Hi. So what I want to talk about is culture. So I believe that race, it's just a border that's unnecessary when we can embrace unity and diversity. And so I think culture is our greatest gift. And the way we can bridge this racial gap is through culture. So we can merge our cultures. And the ways I thought of is, first of all, music. So we can try to embrace our culture through music, like in community gatherings. We can all listen to music of other cultures and folklore, stories, and even books. Just reading books about different cultures and understanding their culture through literature. I think that's a very good way to understand other people. And then next, I think we should embrace traveling more, like traveling to other countries, other places, and seeing how other people live. And so by going into their culture, I think we can create more understanding, and I think that's the most important thing to bridge this racial divide. Lastly, I think school is one of the best places to do this, because at school there's not as much of a division as in, like, if you go traveling, there's only people of one race. In maybe even in communities, people are split by races, but in school there's people of all races. And if we try to make new friends of different races instead of sticking to people like birds of a feather flock together, if we try to get past that and go in outside of our comfort zone and try to seek people with different races, I think we can start to understand them and bridge this racial divide.
That's beautiful. Thank you. We now have Will Colasurdo, 10th grader again from Hazen High in Renton. Are you there, Will? Okay, we'll see if he joins us later. We will move on to Pranuti Kalidindi, 12th grader from Liberty High in Issaquah. Are you here, Pranuti?
Yes.
Awesome. Tell us what you have.
So I think I like to start to understand any situation by using an analogy, and looking at everything that's happened this year. I think 2020 has really been like a CT scan that's shown us the cancer that's spread throughout our community. I think the cancer in the situation can be compared to systemic racism and the racial divide. I think the CT scan of 2020 has really shown us how there's tumors in every aspect of our country, and that there's no one problem area. There's problems everywhere, and those tumors are our corrupted systems and our biased systems, like policing, education, welfare. All of those systems are so vital to our community, but so many of them are tainted with ingrained beliefs from many, many years, that I think those are causing a lot of harm. And then I think the second part of it to cancer is the cancerous cells. When we treat cancer, we start by using surgery to remove the tumors, but then we use therapies like radiation or chemo to kind of kill off the cancerous cells that are the more dangerous ones that can bring the cancer back. And like Akrish mentioned earlier, I think those cancerous cells are our minds. That's the implicit biases we have, the racial stereotyping that's going on, the ideologies, the Western ideologies that have been ingrained into what's called American culture now. All of those. So to me, to bridge the racial divide, I think primarily for everyone, it's important for us to understand both those tumors, the problems and the faults we have in our societies and our systems, and also the problems and faults we might have within ourselves, both as a person of color myself, any implicit biases I may have towards other communities around me, and just as a citizen of society. What do I believe? Why do I believe that? Things like that. And I think bridging the racial divide is a very hard thing to do, because I think it's a rupture that's been created over hundreds of years. It's a very, very wide and very deep disconnect that's been created to make communities seem different for some reason. And I think as a Generation Z kid and as a teenager, I think for me and my peers, it's really important for us to kind of take the responsibility of setting the tone for how we want to solve that and how we want to fix that, because we are the future of the community, which is why I'm glad we're talking about that today.
Awesome. We are too. Looks like Will is back. Is that right, Will?
Yeah, my computer died. Sorry, I just got it plugged back in though. I'm good now.
No problem. This is Will Colasurdo from, he's a 10th grader at Hazen High, again, Renton. Tell us your thoughts. Give us your thoughts, Will.
Well, I think a big key to bridging racial divide is to be exposed and to be educated on other cultures and stuff, because there's a lot of kids who are only shown what they know, and I think that's like as I grew up Catholic, so I was only taught that. And Nikhil, one of my good friends, as I started to become better friends with him, I was exposed to his culture more, and that kind of pulled me out. And now I don't go to church anymore, and I'm not really Catholic. I mean, technically I am, since I was baptized, but I don't practice it anymore. And I think exposure is good because it teaches you to see outside of like your own world, you know?
Correct. Very nice. And last, but no, not last. We're going to come back to Ryan in a second. Is Gretchen available?
Hi.
Oh yeah, there's Gretchen Freer. She's an 8th grader at McKnight Middle School in Renton. Go ahead, Gretchen.
Hi, and thank you for inviting me. In our country, a lot of the racial divide seems to stem from unconscious and implicit bias. Whether people know it or not, around people who are in some way different, whether it be race, religion, gender, or sexual orientation, they act differently. These habits are typically developed from their environment or what they were taught as children. The problem is that most people don't realize it. It could be something as simple as clutching your bag when a Black person walks past you and doing nothing when a Caucasian person walks by. I think that one way to bridge the racial divide is by building habits early on. If we educate people from an early age on how to recognize and appreciate how everyone is unique and their importance in our world, we can develop habits of seeing everybody for who they are, not by the color of their skin, gender, or sexual orientation. And in order to do this, I think we need to implement different perspectives from different types of people in school curriculums. Usually, important historic events like the Revolutionary War and Civil Wars that are taught in classrooms are taught from the Caucasian perspective. I think that we need to include other races in their perspectives. And though education systems have become more aware of showing other points of view, I think that elaboration is important to make it relatable. A single day in the classroom describing Black soldiers in the Revolutionary War does not show the importance of what they did compared to the months spent learning from the Caucasian point of view. What I'm starting to learn from current events is that by acknowledging the importance of everyone's place in history, it impacts many future generations. People of color and their value in our past have been immense. However, our current education curriculum has not reflected this properly. Their experiences have been oppressed, and for us to stop the unconscious and implicit bias, we need to give everyone equal representation in our school curriculums to build compassion and empathy for all individuals. If we spend equal time to appreciate and honor all different types of people, we can bring our community closer together.
Excellent. I had to take lots of notes there. Thank you. Can we go back to Ryan? Ryan
Yeah,
Zumwalt?
okay, sorry about before.
Oh, don't be sorry. You were doing just fine.
Okay, so to me, I think bridging the racial divide means treating every race the same, regardless of their culture or ethnicity. And racism is something you're born with. I mean, isn't something you're born with, sorry. It's something that you're taught. And it's something ingrained in your mind when you're young, which form the ideals that you bring with as an adult. And so I don't believe the problem is that there are laws preventing people of color from experiencing equal opportunity, but that socially people see each other differently or lesser than themselves. The most important thing we can do is understand our situation and try to educate ourselves and others. In its basic form, racism is a belief that people should be treated differently on the basis of color or culture. And this leads to a multitude of problems like housing divides, disparity in crime and poverty rates, and mistreatment by a system designed to bring equal freedom to everyone. I think the key solution would be to put great efforts into changing the minds of people so they're able to spread right-minded principles to the next generation.
Awesome.
Did I
Thank you,
speak too
Ryan.
fast?
No, it's all right. We got your point. Thank you. Did we get everybody? Did anybody join after we started? Akhil, can you check since you have control of all the participants? Did everybody get a turn that's on the call?
I think so.
Super, great. So we will now go into some questions that we have thought about based on what you've just said. Ram, which ones are those?
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, questions 1, right? Okay, got it. Give me 1 second. I'm kind of losing my thing. So we're going to ask each of you, we'll ask a question and you'll each have 2 minutes to respond to the question. And they're based on 3 blocks. I think Vidya sent you the 3 blocks of topics that we were thinking about. The first question is specifically to people of color. If you can each tell us what specific challenges, pick one challenge that you're aware of that a person of color faces, and what might be the reason behind that. And we can go in the same order that we started. Who did we start with?
You started with me.
Yes, there you go, Akash, go ahead. So what's a specific challenge that people of color face and why do you think that is?
So I think one big problem that people of color face is economic inequality. Obviously, the statistics show how wealth is concentrated in the hands of particular races and how the minorities historically have less percentage of wealth. And this affects many different avenues, such as it creates a lack of opportunities. It makes it hard to have sufficient resources to succeed in education and, once you graduate, have means to afford higher education and therefore a higher skilled labor and skilled job and socially elevate from your previous generation. That becomes difficult when the economic inequality is there. So I feel that is one issue that people of color face.
And why do you think that might be?
why do I think
Why do you think people of color face this economic inequality? What might
think-
be a driving factor behind that?
well, as I said before, I mean, there's been legislation in the past that has sort of segregated certain racial groups away from the public, the commonplace, and that has created one, inferior education, inferior housing. So when the previous generation is in that state, it's hard for the next generation. The next generation is already at a disadvantage compared to their peers. So they have to work harder to, socially elevate, right? So I feel because of that, there's economic inequality, lack of opportunity, and it becomes harder to socially elevate, as I was saying.
So you think it has to do with some of the laws
Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay. Do you guys remember the order in which you went? Who went after Akarsh? Ryan?
Oh, but no, I went last.
Here, I'll find it. Oh, Seku, and he's not there. So Akhil, you go next. Same question, buddy.
I think it's just the way that persecuted people are treated every day. Just like when you go to school, when you go to work, and you start a fresh day, and they're treated that way. I think it's just hard to wake up every day and do that day when you're treated so badly. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges to face, having to face every day as a racial minority, as someone who's being ostracized and being put at a disadvantage just because of their race. And so I think it's just unfair, and it's hard to ask them to just live life as everybody else does when they're being treated so bad.
Got it. Okay. Pranuti?
Yeah, I think Akarsh and Akhil kind of hit the nail on the head with the two that they brought up. I also think a better question might be, what problems do people of color not face? Because I think there's way too many to just pick one. But coming back to your question, I think a little bit off of what Akarsh said, if I had to pick one, it would be healthcare inequality. Coming off of the income and economic inequality is healthcare. Right now, during COVID-19, most of us in this Zoom call are privileged to have a healthcare system where if we were to get sick, we would be able to go get treated. And that's because we've been able to have a privilege of being in a community and in a family where we can afford that. But looking at the whole with people of color, there are so many African Americans and Hispanics and everything who, because of their economic inequality, were in the first place unable to get healthcare. And now that's seen being multiplied because of COVID-19. People who don't have enough money, who don't have the resources to get jobs or education, are living in areas that aren't as safe for them to be in during times like this. And because of that, they're getting sick. And because they're getting sick, they're going to the hospital, they're not able to get care. And it's this whole interconnected problem that's come from, I think the best way to describe it would be systemic racism. That systematic and systemic way of that continued suppression over generations, like Akarsh mentioned, that is something that's impacted different communities of color for so long that it's literally almost a 90-degree uphill battle for them to try to walk up and fix that. And so that I think that systemic racism is something that a lot of people are starting to realize now and are starting to fix, which is a great thing for people of color. I think they're finally getting that voice, and people are not only being aware of their problems, but becoming aware and empathizing and trying to find ways to fix that.
Got it. So you think income inequality is leading to healthcare inequality? In some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In some ways, yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Will?
Mhm.
Go ahead, Will.
Hello?
Yes, can you hear us?
Okay, I can hear you now. It cut out for a second.
No problem. So yeah, what do you think about what do people of color specifically in your mind face, and what might be the reason for that?
Well, I think everyone so far has made good points, and I want to talk about something that I don't think anybody's talked about yet, which is microaggressions, which are like the small actions that people who are doing those actions may not see them as harmful, but people of color like take these things like just a joke. Some people play it off as a joke, or they're like, they say they're curious, but like the words hurt about the way you phrase things. Like how people, like racist jokes and stuff that are kind of passed off as, oh, it's just a joke, it's fine, but it's really not. And people shouldn't, I don't know.
No, that sounds reasonable. Yes, definitely. Ryan, your thoughts?
I think a problem they face is the economic disparity between races. So there's okay, especially Black people have and Hispanics have lesser access to tax benefits and like that because they have such a low house ownership rate, and so sorry, hold on, and so this is and then. So they have lesser access to better jobs because of market discrimination. They earn less every year because they can't get access to the same jobs. There's a lower house ownership rate. And so yeah, they have less access to savings and tax benefits, and it forces them to less advantageous employment opportunities. And so
And what do you think might be causing that?
I think it's because of discrimination and employers. The fact that it's not like exact segregation, but then they're compressed into like smaller communities, and they don't have a lot of opportunity to get out of them. So they have to work so much harder to get where like a white person would be. Like the average median income for a white family is like 170,000 compared to a black families of like 20,000. And at a certain point, it starts becoming like, oh, well, they're just not trying hard enough. I think it's just because they have to try so much harder, and it demotivates them, you know. And it's like Akil said, they wake up every day and they have to face everyday struggles that people like white people don't have to face.
Got it. Did we get through everybody for this question? We did, right? Okay. So our next question is this.
Gretchen.
Oh, there we go. I thought I forgot some. Where's Gretchen? She's not here.
Hi.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Gretchen. Sorry about that.
So I think one of the big struggles is in leadership. Only Black professionals only hold 3.2% of executive jobs, and the rest is disproportionately white men. And I think this is because from history that's been typical. Most presidents from early on have been white males, and all the way up until President Obama, they were all white males. It has been the status quo. It has been what society has thought was correct. And I think that one of the hardest problems is trying to break the status quo and bringing more people from minorities into positions of leadership.
And why do you think that had become the status quo? What do you think may have caused that?
I think early beliefs have been like carried through like generations, being passed down. So like in the beginning, like Black people were thought of nothing but slaves, like their lives weren't as important as white people's. And though like we as a society have evolved, and so everyone like lawfully has equal rights, there's the same mentality that has been passed down throughout generations, that white men should be the leaders, and that minorities, women, Black or people of a minority, any type of minority, don't deserve the same position.
Got it. Okay. Going back to Akash. Akash, do you want to take this next question first, or do you want me to go in the opposite direction so you have some time to think this time?
I think I'll take some time to think.
Okay, good. So who wants to go first? Tell me, or we can start with Gretchen. How about that? We just go back. Does that work, Gretchen? Yeah, okay. Our next question is, so many people point to recent immigrants of color and their success to make the case that race is no longer a systemic issue in our system or in our society. Your thoughts about that?
I think that's really not true, because though some people have had success, the majority of people haven't. Like, I don't remember exactly who it was, but like a lot of people, like the proportions of poverty is higher for minorities than for like white suburban neighborhoods. And I think that racism is still a big issue from unconscious bias. People aren't just like their mentality. Hold on 1 second. Their mentality suppresses minorities or people of color, and though some people have had great success, the majority haven't. Like comparison from successful white men compared to successful minorities, there is a big difference, and I think racism is still a big issue. Like Will was saying, the jokes, and like 1 second.
Well, I get your point. You're saying that it's that you don't agree with that statement, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
That you don't agree with it. Okay, got it. Will, would you like to go on that one?
Sure. I'd like to say that I don't agree with that statement, and though those people that are shining, even though they had faced many challenges, are a lot of the people who had to work very, very hard and keep working against the constant pressure of like the world constantly working against them. And that shouldn't be pointed to as, well, why can't everyone else do that? Because us as white people don't understand what it's like to be constantly pushed back when you are trying to achieve a goal. We can't say, well, they did it, why can't you? That's not fair.
Okay, got it. Ryan?
Was a question why people still think that it doesn't exist today?
Right, because I'll read it again. Many people point to recent immigrants of color and their success to make the case that race is no longer a systemic issue in our society. What do you think about that?
I think that's really ignorant because, like, okay, the only immigrants that, okay, there's Asian immigrants that come and they work hard in STEM fields and earn a lot of more money because those are higher paying jobs. So obviously they're gonna make more money, but that's not like, that doesn't represent the entire race as a whole. And when they do that, they take light away from the races that still have to work harder every single day to get where other people are. And people who say things like that are like, they just probably haven't experienced it yet. They can't say like, well, I haven't seen racism, so therefore it doesn't exist. That's really small-minded because they have to look like into like, they have to like be more open to thoughts and ideas, and they need to see what's going on around them, even if they don't want to. Because when they live like that, all they are is contributing to the problem.
Got it. Okay. Pranuti?
Yeah, I completely want to build off what Ryan said, starting off with the fact that I do think it is very ignorant for people to think that just because a few people of color who have recently immigrated have found success, that the problem isn't an issue. And I think that is the problem. Like Ryan mentioned, that ignorance is coming from privilege. If you are able to think racism doesn't exist, it's because you don't have to face it. And that is a privilege that you're taking for granted, and you're not, that privilege itself, that very thought, I think, can be very harmful to the other people of color, because you're throwing under the rug the hard work that they're having to put in every single day. Those few people who are able to gain success, when you make that statement, have you looked at the amount of work they've had to put in? Have you looked at how much harder it was for them? Have you looked at the ratio of them compared to the number of white men that are actually doing well, the number of white people in general? So yeah, I don't agree at all. I think systemic racism is still very much an issue, and I think the fact that we're having to discuss about it shows that how much of an issue it is. And yeah, I think anyone who unfortunately may still be in denial or who may still be unaware of the problems, I really do wish they can find some sort of reality check or can gain the resources necessary to open their eyes to the privilege that they're having and support their fellow humans who don't have the same privileges.
Got it. Akhil?
I want to build off the fact that majority of people are still under the influence of racism. I feel that as long as there's one person being affected by racism is still in our country. So even if everybody except one person is doing perfectly fine, racism is still in our country. And that's not the case. There's still a lot of people who are being affected by racism. So just because some people are doing well doesn't mean that race is not a problem. It's still a problem, if not more of a problem, because it's being overlooked by this ignorance.
Got it. Akash?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Akhil just said. I think just using a very small sample size and saying that all minorities are successful because of that small sample size is very detrimental to like the progress of our nation and embracing our diversity and working towards creating change. Because if you don't acknowledge the problem, it becomes very hard to create change. So I think people who say that need to look at the statistics, look at the troubles people are facing, look at the protection under the law, look at whether are we providing equal protection under the law to all our citizens, regardless of race. Just looking at that will make them understand that that small sample size is not representative of the problems that racial minorities face as a nation.
Did we get everybody? Did I miss anyone? Okay. Moving on to the next question. Some people say that all minorities, people of color, religious minorities, ethnic minorities, all face discrimination of some sort. Do you agree with this? Or do you think that some groups face unique issues? If so, what might they be? You can give us an example of if there's a unique issue that you have seen a specific community of color face. We'll start with who wants to go? Let's see. I'll just pick Ryan.
Can I go next? I'm gonna think about this.
Who's ready? Who wants to go? Go, Pranati.
So if I understood your question correctly, you were asking if all minorities face discrimination first, and if there's any specific discriminations that certain minorities face, right?
Correct.
I think the fact that they are a minority shows that, or kind of is a given that they will face some sort of discrimination. The fact that people place them as a minority and say, whether it be sexually, for people who are just don't view themselves as either male or female, for those type of people, with them being a minority already, I think it's a given that they're going to face discrimination. So in any minority, I think discrimination is given. Now, I do think it differs. I think some minorities are more strongly persecuted or discriminated than others. In that example, I do think color, I wouldn't say is more discriminated, but I think it's easier for people to discriminate based on color than it is based on sexuality or other minorities. So I think looking at the amount of discrimination different minorities may receive, I do think minorities of color receive more discrimination than minorities of when it comes to the LGBTQ community. But when you mix those two, when you have someone of color who is part of the LGBTQ community, they are at the lowest of society in the sense that they are facing the utmost discrimination. And I hope that kind of answers your question on my perspective, that different minorities do yeah.
Yeah, you're almost there. Although, do you have any examples of a specific challenge faced by one specific community? Do you have any, or do you think in general the challenges are pretty common across all people of color?
I think they're pretty common. obviously the reasons for the discriminating, or what, like verbally, what people might say verbally is going to be different based on the different minority, but I think overall the main things are going to be the same. So just what comes to mind first when it comes to getting a job. Um, all minorities will face that difficulty in getting a job in some different sense.
Got it. Okay. Akhil, you want to answer that?
I think that all minorities do face this discrimination because when people talk to minorities, they talk to them differently. So if they're a minority of they're a minority for a reason. It's either because of race or because of financial things. And so some minorities, such as like people of color, like Black people, they're a minority because of multiple reasons. Because they're separated from financially. There's a large portion of them in poverty, and they're also separated racially because people discriminate them based on race and financial. And so I think it just makes it harder. And I think it's unique to each minority about how they're discriminated.
Got it. Gretchen?
So I do think that minorities are oppressed, but there are different problems for different groups. A lot of these issues branch from like stereotypes. So from personal experience in like schools, Black people are perceived as bad students, or Asian students are perceived as the smart students. And I think that each stereotype comes with its own challenges. And I think that minorities are definitely like oppressed, and they're like, I feel like they have like more of a label that are given to them than white people. Like they're supposed to be a certain way, or they're judged a certain way.
Got it. Okay. Akash?
Yeah, I would like to specifically highlight the African American community because I feel that our nation has wronged them for centuries, starting with slavery, then segregation, and the effects of those things are still present today. I feel that that's why there's so many obstacles for those in the African American community to reach success that have been brought by the doings of the past. And I feel that this barrier is something that not many other communities can. I mean, you could talk about the Native American community also face similar issues with their land being taken away, but I feel the with slavery and segregation, the African American community was put at such a disadvantage that the amount of effort needed to socially elevate is much greater. So I feel that their struggles must be highlighted at this present juncture.
Got it. Who do we have? Ryan, you ready?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they all face discrimination on some scale, but some of them face more or less than the others. Like, for example, my mom's Vietnamese, and when she was growing up, she was constantly harassed by her peers in her community for being Asian. She lived on a farm and everything, so she was like kind of poor, so everyone treated her differently, and it just wasn't great. And so, but then now we hold people to different standards, and like, yeah, Asians, they'll be good at math, or Asians will be good in the STEM field, they're really smart. And then, and personally for Asian people, when they don't do good, it feels like they failed. Like their parents make them feel like they failed, or society says, well, why aren't you a million? Why aren't you super smart? Why aren't you like doing better than everyone else? And yeah, for Black people too, for like hundreds of years, we treat them different. Like I think they suffered the most in America compared to all the other minorities, because like for 100 years, we put them in chains. And then once we got them out, we treated them differently and segregated them as a society, and we lived in two, like divided. And even now today, even though all the laws are supposed to be the same and everyone's supposed to be treated equally under the government, they still experience different opportunities, less opportunities than white people or other people.
Got it. So you think each group has its own share of challenges?
Yeah.
Got it. Did we get to Will on this question? I can't remember. Will, did you get to answer this one?
No, not yet.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, sorry about that.
So I think everyone's done a good job of this, addressing like discrimination, but one issue I don't think anybody's talked about yet is representation in media and like novels, like books, movies, and stuff. Minorities. I think all minorities, whether they're mi- people of color, people of the LGBTQ community, they struggle for representation because it's almost always the white, straight, male protagonist. And representation in our history too. Like there's not just in stories, but in like obviously there's people in our history that people of color in history that have done very important things, but they aren't highlighted as much as the white people and what they've done.
Got it.
If I could add on to that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do really agree with that. I think there's barely any representation for Black people in media. Like we had Black Panther a couple years ago, and an actual issue that people were like mad about. They were saying like there's too many Black people in the movie. Like what? what? It's a movie about like African heroes. And then in media, they only show like really bad things. Okay, so for the protests recently, there are a lot of peaceful protesters, but then the media only shed light on people who are like burning buildings down or robbing stores, whatever. And most of those people weren't even people of color, to be honest. And so when they do that, it puts more thoughts in the mind of these people who don't believe in racism, who think, oh well, look at this. There's just people. It's just a bunch of fire. It's just people committing arson and crimes. We need to stop these protests. And then once all the violent things die down, there's still peaceful protests going on. The media stops reporting it, and it's out of the news again.
If I might add on to that real quick, I know I'm a third voice coming on from what Will and Ryan said, but I think when it comes to representation, it's really important to remember how we're representing them too. It's not fair if people of color are only represented in situations where they're talking about themselves being marginalized. So if the only time we hear from voices of color is when those voices of color are talking about how they're marginalized, when are you going to hear about the other things that those people of color face, the good things they're done, their successes, the stuff like that? Coming off what Will says in history, all the famous African-American or all the famous people of color that we hear about, they all came from situations when they were marginalized. And the only reason we know them is because history textbooks have been forced to talk about them because that was important. I think it's really important when we move forward thinking about representation, like Gretchen and Will mentioned, that we should keep in mind how we're representing those people and that they're actually getting representation for topics other than just marginalization or discrimination.
Got it. So like that goes back to Gretchen's point about reading or learning about history from not just the perspective of the Western world, but from actually the perspective of the people being talked about. That's valid. Yeah. All right. So Ramji, am I doing the next question or is that yours?
No, I'll pick it up. That's fine.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Take it.
So again, guys, I think awesome discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to switch topics, switch gears a bit, because we've all been talking about how do we see issues around bias and discrimination. But if you think about, what happened, after the horrific incident in Minneapolis with George Floyd,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the people who actually raised their voice in protest were the young people. People like you and Gen Z and the younger people. Do you think that there's sufficient awareness amongst, do you think there's sufficient intergenerational awareness? Your parents, your grandparents, the older people in society. Do you think they have the level of awareness that all of you have on some of these systemic issues we're talking about?
And can I add to that, Ramji?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think they have that level of awareness, and do you think we need to up that awareness, and how can we do it?
Yeah.
You guys take a few seconds to think and then raise your hand, whoever is ready.
Yeah. Okay, now if nobody raises their hand, I'm gonna think of this as a classroom. There you go, Purdy. Go for it.
I'll start because I had a few things that immediately jumped to my mind. If I have anything else to add, I'll probably add at the end
Yes,
again.
absolutely. Yeah.
But something I hear from when I've talked to some family friends is, like you mentioned, Ramji, that a lot of the people who have been talking have been the youth. I've heard from adults that it's because we have young blood, or that we get aggravated easily, or that we get more emotional easily. And I think that's the problem, that maybe the older generations are not getting emotional easily. Some people might view it that we're more easily influenced. And I think that's a good thing, because we're being more easily influenced, it's easier for us to change our biases or what's been ingrained in us. And I think the reason you see more young people protesting is because I think more young people have realized the problem. And I don't mean that in a way saying that older generations are not trying to fix the problem. I definitely think that they are, but I think it's harder for them maybe because they've spent more years living in that bias that they've had. They spent more years practicing that bias. So I think it is harder for them to come out of that. I think it's harder for them to realize that in the first place. So I think it would be great, honestly, whether it be immigrant parents who have joined the country recently, who don't know much about the country's history, and who are viewing all that's going on right now without properly educating themselves about the hundreds of years of suppression that's happened. I know I've heard from some parents saying, oh, these African Americans are being too violent, they're being too aggressive, they're speaking up too much, like, why can't they do it in a more peaceful way? And I think something I said to that was, well, would you be peaceful if you were oppressed for 300, 400 years? Would you talk in the same way? So I think being able to know the history of what's going on is really important for the older generations. That history, and then the increased push for them to take the effort to realize their implicit biases they've lived with for many years.
You know what? That's a great answer, and I'm going to ask you a follow-up. And actually, I'm going to ask everybody a follow-up to my original question as well. For the kids of first-generation immigrant parents, people who've recently come to the United States, how do you think, they view the issue of race? How do they perceive that, number one? And what do you think we can do to collectively as a community to sort of raise that awareness? Because ultimately it's all of us are in this thing together. And so what are your thoughts on how we sort of bridge that, information divide between the youth, people who've gone to school here, who have been born here, brought up here, versus somebody who's only recently come into this country?
I think I'd like to give everyone else a chance to respond to the question before I give my thoughts on this follow-up again.
That's great. Okay. And so you're going to have to answer both questions now, guys. Who's going to go next?
Can I try?
Go for it.
Yes, please.
I can't speak for every single parent or anything, but I feel like a lot of immigrants get the notion that because they were born in a country where they're oppressed by the government, or they're born into poverty, that when they come here, it's such an upgrade from life that even though they go through all these struggles every day, all these like little things or big things that affect them, they're like, well, that's just life, it's better than what we had before, so we'll just deal with it and move on. And when they do that, it just keeps adding to the problem, because it like allows these people to keep doing what they're doing. It enables people. It's enabling these racist people to keep saying whatever they want, or the system to keep doing what it's doing, because no one's speaking out against it. And so when the youth does it, it's like the parents are like, well, why are you being so angry? This is just how life is. Just keep going on with it. And they feel powerless, and they accept that. They're fine with it because they think they're fine with the things that they think they can't change, but instead of standing up against it and trying to change it. And so I think to bridge the information gap, I think it's our job as kids to or the youth to try to educate our parents and try to convince them that there are things that can be changed. Just show them things where it's like we stood up for something and it worked. Like things like that. I think we just need to try our best to convince our parents that we do have a voice and we do have power in this community. And if we work hard all together, then we can change the minds of people, and we can change how our system works.
That's great. Great answer. Who wants to go next? Will, do you want to go next?
I don't think he heard you.
There you go. Yeah, he's just talking.
Sorry, my internet keeps cutting out. It's weird. I can you rephrase the question, because I haven't been able to hear much of the conversation.
So if you think about now, if you think about what happened after Minneapolis, the heart-wrenching situation in Minneapolis, it was really the young people who actually stood up to make their voice heard and to drive for change. Do you think that there's sufficient intergenerational awareness of these issues of systemic racism and bias? And if so, no, I won't even have to say if so. So do you think there's a intergenerational gap in that awareness, and how so?
I do think there is that. What'd you say again?
Generational.
Intergenerational, yeah. I think that is definitely true, because I see all over my social media, this stuff is still popping up even when the media died down. I still have my friends posting all these things, and I don't know why that is, to be honest, but I know it's definitely happening.
And do you think that, your parents, people who are older and, who've been around the block, do you think they sort of get what's going on and why we're at such an inflection point in our country?
I didn't hear that. Can you say that again?
So do you think that your parents, the adults, the older people, that they sort of understand the inflection point we're at in this country and what's really happening around this issue of race and bias here?
I don't think they fully understand it, because, like Ryan mentioned earlier, the media was quiet once the protests stayed peaceful, and I don't think, at least I don't think they're seeing the same things that I'm seeing on my social media, where I'm seeing videos of people where they're protesting, and then there's the anti-protesters who are like protesting the protest, and they will be there trying to cause a riot. They're trying to make the movement look bad by trying to cause violence, and I see the people in the movement preventing the violence from breaking out, because they want the movement to not have a bad face, because that's what the people's goals are when they infiltrate the protests and are there to irritate and aggravate these people who have a right to be mad, and they are just trying to make the movement look bad when it's not. And I see these videos that don't have very many views, but there's people who are like, this guy's walking through with a MAGA hat and an American flag, and someone rips the flag off because they're mad, and then another person takes the flag from him and gives it back to the guy because it's not right for them to take the flag, even though he's just trying to irritate them, if that makes sense.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Who'd like to go next? Akhil, do you want to? I'm sorry, Akash. Akash, go ahead.
Oh, okay, yeah. So when I think parents are aware of what's happening, they watch the news, they read news journals, they read magazines, but when looking at racial injustice, they want to question the situation. They want to see what did the person do to deserve this, rather than understanding the systemic racism that's happening. They want to look into it further, analyze the morality of the person who's receiving the treatment, rather than understanding the systemic racism that is present. And I think until we cross that barrier, it's going to be very hard to get our parents to be invested in issues of racial discrimination and have them care. Because I think the main thing is we have to get our parents to care about racial discrimination beyond just consuming news. We have to make it so that they are willing to be vocal about such issues on their platforms. So I think the Gen Z generation has to get our parents to care about the issue at hand. And that, I feel like that can be done through showing successful protests, showing yielding change. Let's say a protest that we carry out, if that yields change in legislation, that shows our parents that shows people that protest activism can lead to sufficient change. So I feel that if we keep continuing our efforts, eventually there will be a day when our parents, understand the issues at hand and they are on board with us as well.
That's actually a wonderful answer. You raised some really good points. And in fact, one of the points you raised is going to be the topic of my next question. So great job there. I want to move on to Akhil, go ahead. Would you like to give us your thoughts?
So, okay, as my parents are immigrants, I believe that when you're going to a different country, I don't think the issues of race are going to be the same as if it was in your own country. So if you go into a different country and the issues you see, you're not going to be as connected to them. And so I think to raise the awareness, I think probably media and news are the biggest sources of awareness. And if media twists the information, then they're not going to be as informed. So I think it's our job as their children to inform them correctly, like not just from what we learn at school, but what we see in real life.
Great point. Absolutely. Gretchen, Gretchen, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so though my parents are trying to educate themselves, I don't think they completely understand the issue. So the schools that I've gone to have been pretty diverse. There's been all different types of people. But when my parents were growing up, they went to mainly white schools where there were very few minorities, and those minorities were outsiders. So I feel like I was saying early on, good habits developed early on will carry on throughout your life. So I feel like because my parents did not have the same diversity in their schools that we have in our schools now, that their perception of race is kind of like the minorities are the outsiders. Yeah.
Great answer. Did we cover everybody, or has anybody not been able to respond?
I think Pranati had something to add.
Yeah.
I was just going to add my thoughts after everyone else had a chance to speak as well. But quickly, I think since everyone covered a majority of it, I really agreed with what Akar said about when any conversations do try to come up. I also see the trend of the parents trying to question the morality of that one case or that one person, or that what did he do to deserve it? What did he do? Trying to find points to question about that person instead of looking at the big picture and understanding the real problem here, which is the systemic racism. I think everything that parents are receiving right now, and I think another thing Will brought up was that with kids having more access to social media, we're seeing a lot more of what's happening at the heart of it, and we're seeing a lot more of the change as it starts. So the initial seedlings of change, we see that more. And I think because the change is so monumental, it's going to take time to actually be implemented. And so when that implementation time, that gap there, I don't think the adults are really seeing anything there. I don't think they're seeing that what's going on behind the picture, which is why I don't think they're able to understand the change that's going on so far. A couple of things I've heard from adults is, oh, what you guys doing isn't working, or this isn't working, that isn't working. And it's often a case of, no, it's not that it's not working. It's just that you don't see it yet. It's not being shown yet. It's going to take some time. So I think what Akash mentioned and what Will mentioned about, I think adults not understanding the problem of systemic racism, especially immigrant parents, and then them not seeing the entire picture. I think that's kind of the reason there's that intergenerational gap between who is protesting and then why are they protesting. And I think to fix that, for the immigrant parents, I think that's just a case of taking ownership of the problem and having the want to learn about it. I think many of the youth are definitely very open to talking to their parents. I hope they are, and educating their parents if the parents would like to listen. So I think it's a case of the parents being willing to listen and being willing to make that effort.
That's a great answer. And I just want to build on something you said, and I think it was a point Akarsh made. If you think about it, the first step in bridging the racial divide is learning and having that openness to listen. And as children of immigrants, the immigrant community, all of you have a very unique responsibility to make sure that your parents and your extended social circle is made aware of some of the issues that you see, because ultimately you bring a very unique perspective to this as people of color, as young people, as children of immigrants. There's a special responsibility there. So a general question to all of you: what's the role, what's the responsibility that you believe as young adults and future leaders in the community, what is the responsibility all of you have, both within your families and your extended circle, to raise that awareness, to get that sort of constructive dialogue going within communities and across communities? What's the role and responsibility you believe all of you have? Who'd like to go first? I won't pick on you because you just answered now, but I'm happy if you wanted to go first, Praniti, or who'd like to go first? Go ahead, Akash. I see you raising your hand.
Yeah, so I think the question was whether it is our responsibility or how. So I mean, I think definitely it falls on us. It's our duty, rather. It's not something that we have to do to educate our parents, make sure that they're aware of the issues, and offer our viewpoints to them. If they say something that is disagreeable, we make sure that we convince them. So their viewpoint doesn't stay there. They become more inclusive, and they better understand the multiple perspectives of the issue rather than coming in with their perspective. Because immigrant families, they've seen success. They worked hard, but the issues that they face is far less than the issues that I would say, like the majority of the African American community or the Hispanic community. They're far less. So in order to get them to empathize with their issues, it takes a huge responsibility on our part to educate them, offer different perspectives to them, to get that overall sense of inclusion in their minds, and hopefully that changes their perspective.
Great answer. Go ahead, Praniti.
So I think talking more about the responsibility of Generation Z, I think the responsibility of what's going on right now falls on our shoulders, whether or not we want it, because whether or not we want to, we will be the leaders in about 40 or 30, 40 years from now. We will be the ones making the laws. We will be the ones making the policies. We will be the ones leading the community. So the responsibility is on all of our shoulders, whether some people accept that or whether they don't. And I think what I've been telling my friends is each of us have 3 responsibilities. 1, to learn what's going on, learn your implicit biases, observe. 2, educate others. So because a huge problem of what's going on right now and why change isn't happening is because people don't know. I think number 2 would be educating others along with yourself. And 3 would be picking one thing to change. Whether that be something small, like changing the way your family talks about different groups of people, or whether it be something big, like joining the protests or leading a petition or leading a protest of your own or stuff like that. I think being true to those 3 things, if every single Gen Z person, every single Gen Z kid can do every one of those 3 things, I think a monumental change will come. And I think we owe that to our community and to ourselves to create that better future for ourselves and for our future generations that will come.
Great. That's a great answer. Love
Super.
that. Yeah. Super. Gretchen, would you like to go next?
I think one of the responsibilities of Gen Z is to kind of support the older generations too, and help them learn about like what issues are in our country, like pointing out ways that they are being unfair to minorities, and then simply to educate the next generation as well to implement in our school systems more perspectives, to educate ourselves as well on other minorities and how they their beliefs, their they're part of our history.
Great, great. Um, Ryan, would you like to go next?
Was the question what we could do to change our parents' minds about?
What's the responsibility you believe that Gen Z have, both in terms of influencing your immediate family and your circle around the issues of bias and race, and more broadly within and across communities to talk about issues and how do you approach this constructively?
I think personally, it's our responsibility to educate ourselves and our family. And, like as kids, you nag your parents over and over again, and eventually it gets to the point where they're like, they give in because it works and they want to make their kid happy. So I think what we could do is just keep over and over again, keep going to our parents and trying to talk to them and trying to convince them, trying to change their way of thinking. Because I think if their way of thinking is wrong, then they're going to keep influencing people around them. They keep talking. They'll talk to their friend will talk to their friend. It's going to keep going on, and the problem will keep continuing. And so, as a community-wise, I think we can go out, we can talk, we can use our social media to post things, bring awareness to situations and issues in the world. We can do things like this. That we just need to use our voice and come together as a community and speak out against issues.
Mhm. That's great. It's really all about when you see something bad, injustice, you speak out, make your voice heard, because ultimately that's what differentiates us here in the United States from many other countries where if you speak out against the government, you're locked up.
Correct.
Here, we've got our constitution, our rights, and that's what we all have to do. So that's a great answer. I think, Akil, you've not had a chance to sort of share your thoughts on the responsibility you see as the younger generation or the next generation. What are your thoughts to that question?
I think the news is probably one of the best sources. Just watching the news with your parents and talking about it, I think that'll lead to a lot of like new conclusions, new ideas, and new views. And so, and if you just not only just watching the news, but also researching more about it, so you fully understand the topics, so that you and your parents are more well informed, and you can have um, like the correct views to have.
Great. Did I miss anybody? Has everybody had a chance to?
I think Will has to
Yeah,
go.
I haven't gone yet.
Oh, go ahead, Will.
So I think, am I allowed to like kind of edit the question? If that's
Go
okay.
for it. Go for it.
So I think as a white person, I'm privileged, and I think it's my responsibility to
Did we lose him? I think it says
I
low
think
band.
he's got low bandwidth. I think he's
Yeah.
got an internet issue.
Can you guys hear me?
Back, Will?
I'm unmuted. You guys can't hear me?
Yeah, go. I think you had some internet issues. Go ahead again. Start all over again.
Oh, okay. Well, let me collect my thoughts. I gotta.
That's okay. You're doing great, man.
Okay, so I got. So I need to use, as a white person, I need to use my privilege to speak out against injustices, like in the classroom. I had, especially in my freshman year, I had a teacher who someone wanted help with a test, and since I was like ahead of the class, I was allowed to go help the person, and then that was one of my white classmates, and then one of my African American classmates was asking for help, and since he was sitting next to me, I asked the teacher if I could help him, and he said no, and I was like, why can't I help him? And he was like, and he refused, and I was like, but just yesterday you let me do help the other person. And he was like, no, I can't, sorry. And so then what I did is, even though he kept putting a barrier in between me and my classmate, I kept turning around and I kept helping him because it was the right thing to do, and he deserved to get help just like the other white classmates did. Because it wasn't fair of me to just not help him.
Absolutely. I think what you're saying is everybody has the duty to stand up when you see injustice. You stand up, you speak out against it, and you take action where you can. And so that's a great example.
I missed most of that. I think my internet cut out. Sorry. Can you repeat that? Cut out again.
I'm sorry. So are you asking me to repeat what I just said?
Yeah, sorry. I didn't catch any of that.
No, what I said was, your answer is really spot on, because the key thing to start to make change happen is if you see something wrong, if you see injustice, you got to speak out against it, and you've got to act and push back. And what you did in class, admirable, and that's what we all need to do as a community and as a society. So it's a great answer. Now, as we start to wind down, I want to ask everybody, if you could step back, sort of snap your finger and really, drive change in one element around this issue of implicit and explicit racial bias and discrimination. One solution that you could make happen. What would that be? Now, what's one solution that all of you, that each of you would work on, would propose to make things, to make the world a better place? What would that be? And you can keep it as high as you want, or you can get as detailed as you want, but love to get your ideas. I see Gretchen raising her hand. Gretchen, go ahead.
Different types of people or different groups of people have different. So, and I think that our current education curriculum does not properly show this. So I think that especially like the history aspect of education, I think that needs to have more representation of minorities. I know that school systems have been like putting small changes in to give another perspective, but one day of talking about a minority is not equivalent to a month about learning about the Caucasian point of view. So I think that the education system kind of needs a makeover to better represent minorities.
That's great. So you think we need to focus as a community and as a society on education, bring that multiple points of view so that there's a greater appreciation and you get a balanced view of what's happened.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yep.
Who'd like to go next? Akhil, would you like to go next?
I think understanding and awareness is one of the most important things, because whatever the law says, if people understood each other and people understood why they do that, what they believe in, I think more important than law is the actual people. If people went and made friends with other people of other races, they talked to them and they treated them equally. I think that's all we need to solve this race problem. I don't think the law matters as much as what the people do.
It's, you can legislate, but you can't legislate what's in somebody's heart. It's getting to somebody at their core, right? I just want to share something. One of the chiefs of police, ex-chief of police of Sammamish, actually said, you can't hate somebody you know. It's about learning, getting to know somebody, the other person who might look different than you, speak differently, follow a different religion or whatever. It's getting to know each other and become friends. So That's a great suggestion you make. Will, would you like to go next?
Wait, is it okay if I use the bathroom really quick?
Go for it. Go for it.
I think Pranati had her hand raised, Ramji.
Oh, I didn't see that. I'm sorry, Pranati, go ahead.
That's okay. I just like to say that I think what Akhil brought up is a great point, but in my perspective, I think that's taught at the house. In order, the job of nurturing the child, in my opinion, to be that kind of person who looks at the good in others and who looks to try to understand that person's heart before they try to judge by the person's skin color. I think that's the job of the parent. And I think the problem we have here is that many parents, knowingly or unknowingly, are passing on racist, or maybe not even racist, just judgmental things to their kids in the way that they bring up their kids. And I think a couple of people have that amazing ability to look past skin color and really go for the person's heart before they go to judge on other things. But I think that's very uncommon, unfortunately. And I think in order to make a change where everyone can do it, I think it's reliant on those parents to change. But obviously we can't just go get every parent to teach their kids a certain way. So I think in my opinion, what Gretchen said is really important, because for the first 18 to 22 years of our life, your purpose in life for the first 18 to 22 years is to learn. It's to gain knowledge. It's to learn as much as you can. And that happens in two places, in the home and at school. And when the home is becoming one of those places where these beliefs are being passed on, I think it's really up to the school to kind of make up for that and fix that. And like Gretchen said, curriculum, there's so many problems with the way the US teaches history, whether that be US history itself or world history itself. One example is in high school, we learn about the war on drugs and about how the US has been fighting drug abuse forever. But it's not taught that the war on drugs was actually a cover for the US to be able to persecute people of color and attach stereotypes to people of color, saying these people of color use these drugs and that's why they're attacking those drugs. Things like that aren't taught. So that curriculum is such, there's certain curriculums that are fostering such negative things in these kids. And then the atmosphere of the school, the teachers that are, like Will mentioned, the teachers that are acting in ways that are causing racist beliefs to sustain, and the funding that goes to the education system. So school systems that are predominantly people of color are severely underfunded. And you can even see that school systems that are predominantly white get almost $20 billion more per year than school systems that are underfunded. So I think that education system, when we want equality and justice, those two words are taught to us in school mainly. But if we can't fix the school system, there's no way we can expect students to properly understand those. And we can't create newer generations of citizens without them properly gaining a holistic education. So I really do support what Gretchen said there with thinking that the education system is one of the first things, not disregarding everything else, but one of the first things that I would support to be fixed.
Excellent. Great answer. I see Ryan's back. Hey, Ryan, you want to go next?
Was this about like how we can fix our education system?
Yeah, no, if you could snap your fingers, you could select any solution you wanted to address the issue of racial injustice and bias. What would you be? Now, what would that solution be that Ryan would take and drive throughout the country if he had that opportunity? What would that be?
I think it is education system because it's something that's, racism is something that's learned. And when you have an education system that tries to shy away from these issues, these kids don't learn anything and they grow up thinking that whatever their parents taught them is true. And so then they grow up and then the problem's never fixed. So generation after generation, you have these kids who don't learn anything about the real issues in the world, their country, their community. And they keep passing that knowledge on to the kids. They pass their ideals down to the kids and it keeps going. And so if you can change the education system to shed light on these issues, then it would educate these people where they know enough where that they can start doing something and they can understand like, oh, well, maybe what I learned when I was like 5 isn't true. Maybe the things I think about other people on the basis of their skin color, it's not true. And yeah, I feel like there's a lot of censorship in school when it comes to a real issue or like social issues, political issues, things like that. And I don't think that, I think it's a key that we try to focus on educating the youth.
Great. So we see a consensus, almost a near consensus here. That's really all about education, because you want to catch them while they're young and really start to mold how they think about the world and they think about their fellow human beings. That's a great point. Is there anybody else we've missed here for this?
I'm actually seeing education from what I'm hearing from two angles: education of children as well as education of
Of adults.
adults. So it's two streams of education that need to be fixed.
Yeah. And so, did everybody have a chance to sort of share their thoughts on this point? Okay. Now, so first of all, as we close, I'm really heartened to listen to this dialogue, all of the ideas and the thoughts that all of you bring, because ultimately, problems happen, and the way to find solutions is through dialogue. It's ground up, bottoms up, have the conversation and start to expand from there. So I think all of you have done a phenomenal job. You need to be proud of yourselves, and you need to continue the work that you're doing and the thinking that you're putting into this topic,
Yeah.
because this is an issue that our country has been dealing with for many, many, many years. And now's the time for action. And we need people like you to think through these things, because ultimately, when you move into a leadership role, when you're in college, beyond college, you're going to be shaping the environment. So I think that's great. And so, on behalf of everybody at APPWW, thank you. I see you wanted to say something, Pernita. Good.
Yeah, before I close, I just want to say to anyone who's still watching this live stream, when the country was created, the founders knew that at some point problems would arise, and they said that the only way to keep the government in check is in the hands of the citizens. So I challenge everyone who's watching the video, me and all my peers that are on this call right now, we challenge you to please take the time. I ask you to educate yourself, to educate your loved ones, to educate people you care about, and pick one thing that you want to change and help us become a part of this change, because we can't demand a democracy. We can't demand equality if we don't fulfill our duty of speaking up when things go wrong. So thank you for watching the video. And as a student, as a kid, as a Gen Z, I'm asking you to please take the time to become a part of the change yourself.
That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
That's beautiful.
And I do want to say, on the 12th of July, that's next Sunday, APPWW are hosting a town hall on this very same topic, bridging the racial divide, how communities can work together. And we have iconic civil rights and community leaders from across the state coming together for this town hall. So we have Eddie Rye Jr., who's been working for civil rights in the African American community for over 45 years. We have Estela Ortega, who's the executive director of El Centro de la Raza, and she's been at the forefront for fighting for Latino civil rights opportunities and fighting for that community. We have Devadatta Dash, who's an Indian American leader who's worked at the state and national level for the benefit of all people of color throughout the state. Frank Iragon, who's worked at the state level for Asian and Pacific Islanders. Maria Espinoza, who's the founder of the Center for Latino Leadership. She's an educator, and she's been working with the Latino community for many, many years. And Patty Cole Tyndall, who is the deputy, who's the undersheriff for King County. Because so we're getting all of these civil rights and community leaders and law enforcement together to have a conversation on this very same topic. And Lori Matsukawa, hopefully many of you know who she is. She was the face of King 5 News in Seattle for decades. She's going to be moderating this town hall. So I would very strongly encourage all of you to attend. I think it's going to be really educational. Ask your parents to attend as well, because we're going to be talking about lots of issues and it's going to be quite helpful. And share it with your friends and other acquaintances in your circle.
Hi, just one thing I don't think I was able to offer my viewpoint on the previous question. So if I could just wrap it up quickly, like,
Go
is that
for it.
okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
go for it.
So I just wanted to address in the education system, I feel that racial minorities need to be provided with extra resources in their households. I think districts should allocate more funds to provide extra support to these racial minorities to ensure that they're able to graduate. And beyond that, they have a plan set in stone for higher education and livelihood. Because I feel that if we don't pay attention to these groups that are not, these oppressed groups that are not able to succeed in school due to external factors, maybe home income, it's very hard for minorities to come into a position of power and drive change. So I think that is something that I just wanted to address.
That's a great point. Thank you. So we're at the bottom of the hour, and so we will end on time. So again, thank you, everybody. Please, ask your parents, your friends, join us for the town hall on the 12th. We've got a all-star cast to have a really in-depth discussion on this. And so thank you again.
Thank you, guys. Have a good afternoon.